In the United States, a woman and her 2 daughters went on a trip from Ohio to Florida. Something terrible happened to them there, and they never returned from the trip. What happened and how it happened? Follow the story to find out. Welcome everybody to our channel. One day in 1989, the police received a report from a Canadian girl who said she had come to Florida with her friend for tourism. While they were walking along the coast, they met a man who seemed to be a kind and gentle person. He started talking to them and told them that he owned a boat and that he took people on boat rides. Then he suggested that he take them on a boat ride. Her friend refused, but he kept insisting and kept convincing them that it would be a great experience. This girl agreed, but her friend refused. Then she got on the boat with him and they set off. After they arrived at a somewhat remote area in the sea, that man pulled out a knife and put it to her neck. He told her that if she didn't let him do what he wanted, he would kill her. He also told her not to try to escape by jumping into the sea because the area was full of sharks. She had no choice, so that person assaulted her. After that, she sat in the corner of the boat and covered her face. After dark, the criminal started the boat to return to the coast. When they reached a short distance from the coast, he ordered her to jump out of the boat and swim to the shore. The investigators began their investigation, and they believed that the criminal had ordered her to jump into the sea and swim to the shore in order to erase any trace of her. Therefore, they were unable to collect any evidence from her. However, she knew his face and features well, so she described him to them. The police then drew a picture based on her description, which is the one you see on the screen. 2 weeks later, a group of tourists were boating in the ocean when they saw 2 bodies floating in the water. They immediately contacted the Coast Guard, who arrived and recovered the bodies. During the recovering process, they found that the hands of the body were bound with a yellow rope and the legs were bound with a rope and a brick. The body also appeared to have been assaulted, and the lungs were filled with water, indicating that the victim had been thrown into the water alive. The Coast Guard then began searching for any evidence related to the crime. During the search, they found 2 more bodies of girls floating in the water. After recovering them, they found that they were in the same condition as the previous body, with their hands and legs bound with ropes and bricks. Both bodies also appeared to have been assaulted. The authorities concluded that the 3 bodies were a family because they were similar in appearance. They also suspected that the criminal who killed them was the same man who assaulted the Canadian girl. The police began trying to identify the victims, but they were unable to do so because they had no identification on them. Then, the police released a news story about the discovery of the bodies of 2 teenage girls and 1 older woman, believed to be their mother. They asked anyone with information that could help the investigation to come forward. Shortly thereafter, the police received a call from the manager of a hotel in the area. He said that there were in the hotel 3 female guests, a mother and her 2 daughters. He said that he had not seen them in 3 days, and that when hotel staff entered their room to clean, they found that their luggage were still in the room, indicating that they had not left. The police went to the hotel and searched the room. They found the identities of the 3 victims. The mother was named Joanne Rogers, the older daughter was Michelle, age 17, and the younger daughter was Christy, age 14. They also learned that the family was from Ohio and had come to Florida on vacation. Forensic experts examined the bodies for any evidence that could lead to the killer. Unfortunately, they were unable to find any evidence because the bodies were in the water. Any evidence that could lead to the killer was washed away. Then, the investigators went to the coast to search for the mother's car. After searching, they found it parked in a place near the boat launch. They searched the car and found a map with handwritten directions to the hotel where they were staying, and another piece of paper with directions to the place where they found the car, and also written on it white and blue. The police took the papers to the experts to determine who had written them. After the experts compared the writing to samples of the mother's handwriting, they found that she had written the directions to the boat launch in white and blue. The handwriting on the other piece of paper was not Joanne Rogers, but belonged to someone else with a very distinctive handwriting. The investigators then knew that the phrase white and blue on the paper written by Joanne Rogers referred to the color of a boat. They began to investigate this and collect any information that could help the case. During their search, they received a tip from someone who said that there was a man who lived in the area who gave boat tours and had a white and blue boat. The man's name was Jason Wilcox. The police investigated the matter. They then located his home and went to see him. They saw his boat, which was indeed white and blue. They told him he was a suspect in the case, but he denied everything. The police left because they did not have any evidence against him to prove his involvement. However, they continued to watch him. The police also placed a billboard with pictures of the victims and a message that said that if anyone came forward with information that led to a resolution of the case, they would receive a reward of $25,000. The police began to receive many reports from people who claimed to have information, but most of these reports were without merit. However, one day, the Canadian girl contacted the police and told them that she was sure that the killer they were looking for was the same man who had assaulted her, because the boat descriptions matched. They brought her a picture of Jason Wilcox and asked her if he was the perpetrator. She answered that he was not. Then the police brought Jason Wilcox in, and they gave him a lie detector test, which he passed successfully. They also found that he had an alibi, because there were many people who testified that he was with them at the time of the crime. The police continued to receive many tips about the case, especially after they released the sketch of the suspect and the information that the boat was white and blue. The investigation continued without the investigators reaching any conclusion. 3 years later, in 1992, the investigation was still ongoing without any results. One day, one of the investigators suggested an idea. They would publish an ad with a picture of the paper they found in Joanne Rogers' car, which had instructions to a hotel, and which they believed the suspect had written. And they will offer a financial reward to anyone who identifies the owner of that handwriting. The investigators began to implement the plan. They put up 5 billboards with the directions written in the handwriting of the suspect, and they wrote on them, "Who wrote these directions? You may know who killed the Rogers family. The reward is $25,000. They also put the police station's number at the bottom of the billboards. One day, a woman was walking down the street when she saw the billboard. She immediately recognized the handwriting, and she called the police. She told them that she knew the person who wrote the directions, and she told them that the handwriting belonged to a contractor who had worked on her house before. She told them that she had invoices written in the same handwriting, and she told them that they could come to her house to see for themselves. The investigators went to the woman's house and she showed them the invoices. The handwriting on the invoices was very similar to the suspect's handwriting. The woman told the investigators that the contractor had done some aluminum work on her house. His name was Oba Chandler. The police took the invoices and showed them to a handwriting expert for comparison to the suspect's handwriting. With one look, the expert told them that the two handwritings were an exact match. This meant that the person who wrote the invoice and the person who wrote the directions to the hotel were the same person. Then, the police went to Oba Chandler's house and arrested him. He denied the charges and said he was innocent. The police then put his picture next to the sketch they had drawn of the suspect based on the Canadian girl's description. They found that the two pictures were identical. The investigators then investigated and gathered information about him. They found that he had an aluminum contracting company that made aluminum doors and windows for homes. They also found that he had a long criminal record dating back to his teenage years, including assault on 2 women for which he had served time in prison. They also found that he owned a white and blue boat. The investigators then checked the boat's radio log, which records all calls made from the boat. They found that Oba Chandler had been at sea at the time of the crime. The investigators then brought the Canadian girl who had been assaulted to the police station. They showed her a lineup of photos, including one of Oba Chandler. She immediately pointed to Oba Chandler, and she looked scared. The investigators then brought Oba Chandler to the police station with a group of other people, and asked the girl to identify the suspect. She immediately and without hesitation pointed to Oba Chandler. The investigators searched for the boat, but they found that it had been sold 3 months after the crime. The investigators then examined the fingerprints on the paper with the directions to the hotel. They found that the paper was covered in fingerprints, but they belonged to Joanne Rogers and her daughters. However, there was also a palm print. They compared it to Oba Chandler's palm print and found that it was an exact match. Based on this overwhelming evidence, the investigators were certain that Oba Chandler was the killer. Oba Chandler stood before the judge in court. The prosecutor presented all of the evidence that the investigators had gathered. Despite all of this strong evidence, Oba Chandler continued to deny his guilt. He said that he had met Joanne Rogers and her daughters at a gas station. They had gotten lost, so they asked for his help. He gave them directions to their hotel, and that was all that happened. The investigators believed his story, but they were sure that it was not complete. They were sure that after that, he told them about the direction. He started talking to them to make them feel comfortable. He told them that he owned a boat and took people on boat rides. He suggested that they go on a ride, and the girls were excited. They convinced their mother to go. He gave them the address of where his boat was docked and told them that his boat was white and blue. Joanne wrote the address and the color of the boat down. They agreed to meet near the coast in the evening. In the evening, Joanne and her daughters went to the dock and found Oba Chandler. They got in his boat, and after they got to a remote area of the sea, he pulled out a knife and threatened them. He then tied them up and assaulted them. He then tied them to pieces of bricks and threw them into the sea while they were still alive. The prosecutor also presented a witness, a man who was Oba Chandler's cellmate. The witness said that Oba Chandler had told him that he had assaulted a foreign girl in his boat in the middle of the ocean. He also said that Oba Chandler had assaulted a woman and her daughters in his boat in the ocean. He said that Oba Chandler would not be in prison if one of the girls had not tried to fight back. Oba Chandler's daughter and her husband also testified. They said that Oba Chandler had visited them one day at their house unannounced and confessed to the crime. He said that he was trying to hide from the police. After hearing all of the evidence presented by the prosecutor and the testimony of the witnesses, the jury deliberated for an hour and a half. They found Oba Chandler guilty, and the judge sentenced him to death. Oba Chandler remained in prison for several years, and his execution was repeatedly delayed. His execution date was set for November 15, 2011, by lethal injection. On the day of his execution, he wrote a letter saying, "You are executing an innocent man." However, his letter was to no avail, as the evidence against him was overwhelming. His execution was carried out. In 2015, after his execution, investigators discovered that he was a serial killer. In 1990, a 20-year-old woman had been found murdered after being assaulted. In 2015, with the advancement of technology and science, investigators compared the DNA found on the woman to Oba Chandler's DNA. They found it to be an exact match. This meant that he was the one who had killed her. Now, this is the end of the story. We hope you enjoyed your time with us. Write for us your opinions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with your friends.